Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to the Spring 2024 OPT webinar. My name is Jeremy Spohr. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of ISSS, and I'm going to present today with my colleague Daniel Deck. He's one of the advisors. So I'll throw it over to Dan now, and he will start us out in the webinar.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. So as Jeremy said, I'm Daniel Deck here at ISSS, and we're going to look at the OPT, basically kind of two parts, the application process, and then of course, once you get your OPT and it's approved, what next steps need to be taken. All right, let's get started here. So first thing is the basics, right? So what we're doing here is we're just going to get some, the basic knowledge for OPT. What's the point is to get basic knowledge that you've used in your program and use it in the workplace. So it's a kind of employment authorization. And there are really two kinds. There's the pre-completion, which is before you graduate from your program, and then the post-completion, which is obviously after you graduate. Yeah, like Jeremy said, you can put your questions in the chat. Both of these are authorized through USCIS, which is the government. So do not rely solely on the I-20 that you get from ISSS and get that and say, okay, I'm all set, I can go. There's a couple steps you need to take that involve, of course, the government as well. So are you eligible? So can you participate in OPT? Couple things. So you have to be in valid F-1 status, which of course requires your I-20, your visa, and then of course confirming on your I-94 admission that you are in the United States in F-1 status. You've completed at least one academic year in F-1 status. So, so that would be if you started in the fall and that's one semester and you're here in the spring, you can apply now because you will have completed those 2 semesters. And then, of course, unlike CPT, you do not need a job for OPT. Obviously, you will at some point, but during the application process, you do not need to provide us with an offer letter or anything like that from an employer. So those are the basics for your eligibility. And then, of course, what kind of employment can you participate in? So it can be paid or unpaid under regular OPT. So volunteering is definitely permitted in this capacity. You can also hold multiple positions. So it doesn't matter how many, but the important part is that they must all at least add up to a minimum of 20 hours per week. So if you want to hold, 3 positions and the first one you do 10 hours and then the other 2 are 5 each, you've got your 20 hours. Perfect. Or if you just want to have one position and it's 40 hours a week, perfect. And you are also permitted to change employers. So if you get a job and you find a better opportunity that's offered to you, you're more than welcome to leave your first position and then change to the better opportunity during your work authorization. But also with your position, it needs to be directly related to your field of study. So the common question is like, how do you know this? How do you know if it's related to your field of study? So you need to look at the duties versus type of company. So there's a lot of companies that require, or the companies are based in different sectors or fields, but that's not really important. What's more important is what you're doing. And you can look at your academic curriculum, like your transcript, to see what courses you've taken and see how they directly relate to that position. And you need to be able to justify that relationship. So the way I always look at it is if you're, for example, an IT or coding, data science, stuff like that, you can work for Uber as long as you're coding and doing data science, but you can't be doing the driving. So it needs to be related to that field that you studied. And different resources that you can find about different positions would be your academic department, and different alumni, they are obviously going to be a wealth of information on different companies, positions that have hired people in the past, as well as career services that can really also point you in the correct direction when you're looking for employment. Now, the process itself, there's a couple steps here that we're, basically outlining. We're going to get into the details bit here, but the basic overview is you request your OPT, ISSS reviews it. Once the student, you receive that I-20, you file the I-765 with the government. Government looks at it, it's approved, you get paperwork, and then you start your employment. All right, so let's look at that in a little more detailed manner. So the question that I am receiving the most in my email box, especially today, is when can that start? So if you're graduating this May, the application can be reviewed tomorrow. You can submit it. So the application is currently open to submit for your OPT, but we won't look at it until tomorrow. And the reason for that is the 90-day window. So you won't be within 90 days until tomorrow. And that window goes all the way to July 19th. That's the last day that you can submit your OPT application with the May 20th, 2024 graduation. Please, I cannot stress strongly enough, do not request your OPT I-20 on July 19th because that's the deadline. So there's a whole bunch of factors that may cause you to not file in time. For example, we may not be able to see it in time. That'll be the day that the USCIS website will be down. There's just a whole bunch of different things, factors involved. So my general guidance is apply as early as you can for the OPT I-20. All right, so when you're requesting the OPT I-20, right, you're going to go to the website, ISSS website, and you're going to log into IPEN and complete the e-form for that. That e-form is going to not go directly to your academic advisor, who's going to review it. And once it's approved there, then it goes to ISSS, where we also review it for its completion, accuracy, and stuff like that. That's going to obviously involve the processing fee and as well as participating in a tutorial before you can submit the application request. So you've done all that. Now the ISSS office, we have your application. So it's going to take us, we're going to get, we're already seeing a lot of applications fly in. So we're going to get to them as fast as we can. So our normal processing time for your request is 3 to 5 business days. But I would recommend giving us, well, we're going to try to get to them as fast as possible within 5 to 7 days. Please try not to email us during that processing time. We are, I promise, trying to get to it as quickly as possible. So once we review it, everything looks good. We're going to give you a new I-20, and on page 2, it's going to have your OPT recommendation on it. It's sent electronically via email. You're going to need to print it and sign it so that you have a copy of that. Okay. Now, what do you do with that I-20? You need to send it to USCIS. Okay, you need to send that to the government. That needs to be done within 30 days of receiving the I-20. If you get 31 days, you need a new request and you need a new I-20 from ISSS. So you need to repeat the process. If you file with that I-20 more than 30 days, it's going to be denied. All right. So so what you do, you get your I-20, go file your I-765 with USCIS, excuse me. Okay. And you need to do that. You can do that online, which I highly recommend doing because everything is very automated at that process. You don't have to wait for mailing to get to USCIS and to come back to you. Okay, which is right here, right? So just kind of reiterate, if once it's submitted online, you don't have to mail it. It doesn't have to come back via mail. Everything can be done using a credit card or debit card. You don't have to get a check or money order. And then of course, any other correspondence like an RFE, so a request for evidence, that can be sent to you online. So you want to make sure that you're checking that. And you'll also get a receipt number right away, which you can use to check on your application. When you're applying, make sure you complete all the required fields. The system usually stops you from proceeding if you don't fill them in. But if you do miss one or the system misses it, it's going to be rejected. So make sure you review your application before submitting it to make sure everything is complete and accurate. So now you've submitted it, everything is fine. What's next? So first off, how long are you going to wait? Well, right now, I think the wait time is about 3 months if you were to look it up. But once those applications really start flying in, no one really knows the accurate processing time that USCIS is going to take. So there are some things you can do. So for example, you can, one, file early to get a good place in line, or you can pay for premium processing. It's an additional fee of $1,500 currently, and that fee is going to increase to $1,685 on the 26th. So we only have like 5 days to get that in. But that promises an answer to your application within 30 days. So if you have a tight deadline or you just don't want to wait, you're more than welcome to do that at that time. Or you can always put your application in now, wait March, April, see if you get something back, but because you can always upgrade at a later time, it gets to like May, mid-May, you're saying, I really want an answer. I don't want to wait anymore. You can pay later at that time to upgrade to premium processing. Once you submit, you're going to receive a case number or it's a receipt number. Like I said before, you're going to use that to track your case. It's going to be on the receipt notice itself and on your approval notice when you get it. Very, very important is even if you have your receipt and your receipt number, it's not been approved until you receive your card, your approval notice. So you cannot engage in any employment activity. That's training, onboarding, anything like that. You just can't do it until you have that approval and the approval notice is current. So I cannot stress that enough because you do not want to have any unauthorized employment on your record. And the final point here is requests for evidence, RFEs. So sometimes the government will receive your application, look at it and say, I really need something more to understand what this application is or in order to approve it, in which case they will send you an RFE. If you obtain that, you can answer it on your own, or you can bring it to our attention. We can try to work with you on how to respond properly to ensure that your process is approved. So that's pretty much the application process itself. Now I'm going to switch over to Jeremy, who's going to explain what's next after you get your approval. All right, Jeremy.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. So I'm going to take you through the second half here. And so people often ask, when can I start work? So you need to wait until your OPT is approved by USCIS and you have your EAD card in your hand, because you need to be able to show that to your employer so they can put you on the payroll, and that the start date on the OPT card has been reached. So if you put in July 1 to start, and hopefully you get your card on June 15th, you can't start until July 1, because that's what will be written on your card. So you need to follow those dates that are on the card. Okay. When you're actually on OPT, you have some time to begin your job. So you can't accrue more than 90 days of unemployment time once your OPT card begins. So again, let's just work off July 1. So your card begins on July 1. Hopefully you can start your job on July 1, and you will report it to ISSS in IPEN, and that will stop the clock on unemployment. But maybe your card begins on July 1, but your job does not begin until August 1. So that's okay too, but you will accrue 30 days of unemployment during that time. So you have flexibility to start work after the card starts. And it's a pretty good system. Hopefully you can time it as best you can so that you don't accrue too much unemployment time. And if you are getting up to that, say you're getting up to 80 days and you don't have an offer yet, you're not, you don't have any plans to begin work, then you should really begin plans to exit the US before that 90th day is reached. That doesn't happen to too many students, but it does happen to some students. They will contact us. They'll be like, hey, it's been 75 days. I don't have a job. Then my advice to you as a ISSS advisor is going to be, okay, then get a ticket and you need to return home. So we want to discuss some travel because this is often a question for students after May 20th. So remember, all of you, well, probably maybe most of you on this call are going to graduate in May. So you need to think about traveling after May 20th. So let's talk about this. So first, before your program end date, as in spring break, which I think is in 2 weeks from now, or 1 week from now, I don't remember. That is before your program end date because you haven't graduated yet. So the big thing to remember is that you must be physically in the US when you file this OPT. You can file it online. You should file it online, but you must be present. You must be physically in the US at that time, that day that you file it. You're going to get a receipt, and that's okay. That's going to happen, say, in the next couple of weeks. So don't exit the US and try to file it when you're on vacation in Mexico, because then you're out of the US. You want to do it either before you go or when you come back with a fresh I-94 card. You're going to have a new I-94. You're going to be in the US when you file that OPT application to USCIS. And if you want to travel after May 20th, in general, we don't recommend that. But let's dig a little deeper into the travel after May 20th. So some of the possible risks of travel after May 20th, the big thing is you want to know if your F-1 visa and your passport is still valid, because you can't apply for a new visa if you don't have your OPT card and a job offer. So a F-1 visa may be needed. You don't want to be out of the US and your OPT card gets lost in the mail. If your OPT gets denied and you're outside the US, you can't reapply. You're just out. It'll be the end of your F status in the US. You don't want to miss the deadline to respond to an RFE. And I really want to emphasize that your ability to travel after May 20th is really up to kind of your own tolerance for risk. If you don't have the card in your hand by the time you're going to travel, we would recommend that you wait until you get the card in your hand before you exit the US. So these are the things that you want to have if you are going to travel after May 20th. So you've got to have to, in order to come back in to the US. So you got to have a valid passport, you got to have a valid F-1 visa, you got to have your OPT I-20, you got to have your EAD card, and you got to have your proof of employment, such as an offer letter. Now note that when you're on OPT, your I-20 needs to be signed every 6 months. And it needs to also have your employer listed on your OPT I-20. And the dates of employment will be listed also. So for years, while you've been at Penn, we've been telling you, you have to get your I-20 signed every year, every 12 months. But now that you're on OPT, you need to get it signed every 6 months. So that's a switch during OPT. That's a change. So remember these things: valid passport, valid visa, OPT I-20, OPT card, and proof of employment. Those are the things to travel while you're on OPT or after May 20th and before you begin OPT. So let's talk a little bit about the STEM extension. So as most of you know, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Many of your majors may be STEM, and that allows you to apply for a 2-year extension of your OPT period based on your STEM major and your STEM job. So you need to have, you obviously need to have the major, you need to have it listed on your I-20. You need to have a STEM job, and then you need to have your employer help you with a couple of things. They have to help you fill out some documentation, and they have to be an E-Verify company in the US, or employer in the US. And it's similar. It's basically the same process. You're just going to apply for OPT again. Except this time they should give you a card for 2 years. And you apply 90 days before the end of your OPT. So that's going to be like next year at this time. If you've been on OPT for 9 months, and then you may be coming back to us, to ISSS and IPEN, to apply for your STEM. And that's fine. We'll do it the same way. You do an E-form and IPEN, we generate you a new I-20, you apply again to USCIS for the 2-year STEM extension. It's very similar to the current OPT process. Sometimes people get an H-1B, they get selected for the H-1B lottery and their H-1B may start on October 1, but their OPT might end in July. So now they've got a gap between July and October. And if you get picked in the H lottery, then you get what's called the cap gap extension. And you can apply for your, if you're in this situation, not everybody will be, but some H beneficiaries, some H people that get selected in the lottery will need this to cover the gap from the end of their OPT. And whether that's regular OPT or STEM OPT, they have to cover that gap from the summer to October 1. And we can give you an extended I-20 that will cover that time up until October 1, and it's pretty smooth. Then you can just keep working, and then you become H-1B on October 1. And for you guys, if you're graduating this year, you don't need it this year, but you may need it next year or some year during your STEM time, or at the end of your STEM time, you may need cap. It's pretty rare, but we have an e-form for it. You apply through IPEN, you upload your copy of your H-1B approval, and then we say, oh, okay, this guy's got cap gap, and we give you an extended I-20. But that's really in the future for all of you. So let's go through a few FAQs, and I'm gonna kind of read them at you, and hopefully you're gonna know the answer. So please think about them, and we'll talk about it. So if we create your OPT I-20 and then you don't apply for anything, you don't apply for OPT to USCIS, can you still use it? No, don't use it. Contact your advisor and get a new I-20 because it's only valid for 30 days after we create it. So don't forget, when you get a new I-20 from us, apply to USCIS. Do you need your EAD before you start work? Yes, absolutely you do. And the date has to have arrived. The start date has to be met. Can you change your OPT request dates? Well, the answer is it depends. If you have not applied to USCIS yet, then we can change your dates. But once you apply to USCIS and you have a receipt, we can't change your dates. So if you put it in this week and then you get it back and then you find out from your employer, oh geez, they want me to shift my start date by 2 weeks, then get in touch with your ISSS advisor that signed it, and we can probably by email, and we can adjust your dates and give you a new I-20. But if you've already applied to USCIS, you're committed. You can't change them. Can you cancel it? Similar to the same thing about changing dates. If you just applied with ISSS and you just did the e-form and you haven't done anything, then yeah, you can cancel it. But once you've applied to USCIS, like if it hasn't been adjudicated yet, you can try to withdraw it. But generally, once you send it in, you're committed. You can't take it back. USCIS views it as, you've applied for an EAD, you got an EAD, then that's it. Whether you actually work in the US is a different question, but once you apply, you're committed. If I already used 12 months of OPT in one program, will I be eligible for another 12 months? The answer is yes, if you go to a higher educational level. So if you graduate this year with a bachelor's and you do OPT for a couple of years, and then maybe you come back and get a master's, then you can apply for OPT again. Or same thing with masters. You graduate this year with a master's, you do OPT for a couple of years, then you go to a PhD program. And the answer is yes, you can apply for OPT at the PhD level. As long as you go up in level, you can apply again. What's your immigration status on OPT? Everybody should know this, I hope. It is F-1 because OPT is a benefit of F-1 status. You just are still Penn's F-1 student. You may be off working somewhere, but your immigration status is still going through ISSS and your advisor, maybe myself, or maybe Dan, or maybe Jean Ma, or Sean Emery. We are still working with you while you're on OPT, and you're still F-1. So you need to think when you travel, especially Canadians, if there's any Canadians out there, you always want to make sure that when you enter the US, you are entering as F while you're on OPT, because that's your status, your F. All right, so final thoughts. Please look at the ISSS website, read through that info. You've already attended this webinar with us, and hopefully it was helpful. Keep copies of your stuff, keep PDFs of all your documents. Continue to read ISSS emails, even next year, right? When you're on OPT, we still may need to contact you to tell you something, and you need to contact us because you're still working with us while you're on OPT. And here's our links and our social media stuff. So I'll let you look at that. And then I think we have a survey as the last slide.